Hi, thanks for joining us. I'm Mike. This is TPL Media. Go to tplmedia.ca to support the network and see other great shows that are based on the things that Canadians are talking about right now. You know, for decades, Winnipeg has been the country's quiet test market, the economic bellwether. Not too rich, not too poor, not driven by oil like Alberta, not propped up by finance like Toronto, just a balanced, working middle-class city. When policies work here, they tend to work nationally. When they fail here, the country usually feels it next. And right now, Winnipeg's middle class is under pressure. Home prices are climbing faster than wages, rent is spiking, grocery bills are crushing families, manufacturing jobs aren't what they used to be, and public sector growth can't absorb everyone. Young families are questioning whether stability is still possible in Winnipeg. Winnipeg used to be proof that you didn't need to live in Vancouver or Toronto to build a comfortable life. So if that model is cracking here in Canada's most normal city, what does that say about the rest of the country? On today's show, we are asking the question, if the middle class is disappearing in Winnipeg, is Canada next? Well, Paul, it's by the way, Paul Micucci joining me to have this conversation because our economy and just finance in general is in your purview here. Yeah. So I appreciate you joining me on this. Winnipeg is potentially in some trouble, but not only that, it's kind of an indicator for the rest of Canada.
Yeah, I think so, Mike. You know, the size, we've talked about in the past, I think, you and I before the show, Winnipeg and Ottawa were used as test markets to sort of symbolize what products, what was going to work in Canada. Yeah. Economically, it was kind of the test bed because of the size, right? $100 billion economy, GDP, 1.5 million people. It used to be the average GDP per capita, but coming out of COVID, it's fallen to third last in Canada. So
that's a massive jump.
It's a massive fall, quite frankly, because, a working community, you'd think the productivity per Canadian would be high.
Yeah.
But it's actually fallen quite a bit, which I was shocked to see, like, for example, GDP per capita is below Newfoundland.
That's incredible to me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the average GDP per Canada, roughly around GDP per capita, roughly around $75,000. They're at $64,000.
And they seem to have historically had sort of a more steady economy. The GDP will level out over a longer period of time rather than the spikes we see in, for example, Vancouver or Toronto. Is that, do you think, going to start to disappear based on this?
Well, the interesting part,
GDP stat?
Manitoba itself is highly dependent on the United States. So export and import. And export and imports are both, 3/4 of them are from the United States. So, I was diving into it because I knew we were doing the show. And, really, if you take a look at what we export, so we export to the United States pharma, and that's pretty much died. I don't know,
And in a short period of time, when you showed me that number, I mean, it was year over year.
Oh, drop off substantially.
It just disappeared.
From 24 to 25, 300 million just left the market. Now, it's interesting because the State of the Union yesterday, when you were listening to Trump, he is saying that, quite frankly, be prepared that pharma is going to come back into the United States in a big way.
Yeah.
And he is going to reduce the price of pharma. So if you're going to compete in that market, your margins are going to be lower. So even if the Canadian companies are going to produce pharma to go to the United States, he's not going to let it bill at as high a price or sell it as high a price. The margins will be substantially lower. So he is really dictating what's going to happen in that marketplace.
You know what's interesting, Paul, as you say this to me, I'm starting to envision Winnipeg is sort of central in Canada.
Yeah.
It has the major port, major hub there for logistics. A lot of what comes into Canada from the U.S. arrives over the border and into that.
It does.
By rail and truck and into that center. If we are not doing as much business across the border, that's going to fail. And it's only indicative of what we're not doing in business with the U.S. So as we watch Winnipeg, Manitoba on the whole, we're going to see first in places like that things like tariffs having an effect, things like the economy failing having an effect, because that port of distribution is going to slow right down.
Yeah. Well, you look at it, what are their main exports right now? So we talked about pharma being number one, buses, public transport vehicles. So, again, the U.S. is on this mission to build this all at home. So that's not going anywhere.
Right.
Definitely not going into the U.S.
We're building trains, not buses here in Canada. Right?
Exactly.
So,
Potatoes and other vegetables frozen. So, again, that's something that the supply management chains with respect to rapeseed, which is canola,
yeah.
and everything happening with the U.S. is about to change.
Yeah. I mean, right now, Winnipeg is heavily protected by CUSMA, right?
It is. The good thing is on that front, recently the Chinese negotiation by the prime minister has opened up that market, his having to give up EVs and so many EVs in Canada, 49,000, whatever the number is, in order to get that market moving again. But again, as things move forward and we get through CUSMA, how that impacts the U.S. is to be seen. Crude petroleum oils and oils obtained from the ground, the bituminous soils, electrical energy.
So they're in the energy business.
Big way. They're in the energy business.
And we don't think about that. We think only Alberta. We think, that's the center of the universe, and then offshore.
Both ways. So going and then coming back to Manitoba, we have a net export import relationship with the United States. Aircraft.
Yeah.
So this is the one you and I talked about. Aircraft, spacecraft, parts, and then, of course, pork, pigs.
Yeah. Or as they like to refer to it, swine meat.
Yeah, swine or pig meat.
Okay.
Yeah, so
it's very specific.
So big, and then, quite frankly, furniture, electrical transformers, converters, inductors.
But essentially, what you're saying is Manitoba's business is with the U.S. That's where all of the business comes and goes.
Yeah, pretty much. So right now, taking a look at a chart, I'm going to throw it up after the show, but this is as of June 2025, 71.6% of their trade, their exports, were with the United States. Only 5.5 was with China, 5.8 with Japan, only 3.3 with Mexico, and 1.2 with Australia, and then others. So then it's a distribution of others. So heavily reliant, just like we are in the rest of Canada, but because of the size, their small GDP and the 1.5 million population, just like the test markets you saw in marketing, this is the test markets that you're going to see the impacts the fastest. So
yeah,
if we want to watch what's about to happen coming into the middle of the year, this is a market we should be paying close attention to see the impacts.
Well, we have. That's what Canada does. In fact, if you don't mind, I'm going to detour just for 1 second to talk about the test market that Winnipeg has been, just so that people understand what we're talking about. Fast food and retail products, McDonald's, Tim Hortons, all of these guys have historically tried products, new menu items, pricing experiments, store formats even, national ad campaigns, and that in itself, advertising. Almost every ad campaign for every bank, every financial institution, every insurance company, any major communication that needs to be done between Canadians and their health, Health Canada and the rest of Canada is all tested historically in Winnipeg.
Yes.
And, then, Paul, the next thing is policy. So we test policy in Winnipeg historically because of the population, because of the disbursement of the population, but mainly because there's a healthy, consistent middle class of people that you can test on. The people that are going to go to Tim Hortons consistently, go to your restaurant, buy your brand, watch, they've got cable, they're watching your campaign. This was a good, solid test market because it was a solid lifestyle in Canada.
Well, it was, urban and rural kind of equally balanced.
Yeah.
So, and a lot of farming, as we just noted from the products we listed in their export totals. And quite frankly, more manufacturing base. So, we saw airplanes, spacecraft, all those things, generators, all real manual labor technical. And quite frankly, A lot of reasons for that, as we all know, is that, the history of Canada, Eastern Europeans tended to migrate towards, Manitoba, Saskatchewan. They all had a very mechanically based trade base, so they could.
Or it was easy to get into that without a lot of jumping through hoops to get into an industry. You could work your way up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A lot of, I notice in the trades that I deal with on, a daily and a monthly basis, a lot of the really good heavy mechanics are coming still from Eastern Europe. So whether it's, for trucks, whether it's for generators, that a lot of them come, and that just because that's what they learn as a trade going forward.
Now, one of the other things that kind of struck me as we were talking about this, and as I was looking into my little bit of research into Manitoba, Winnipeg households are working more hours than they did a decade ago and taking home less share of income compared to previous generations. This is devastating to many people who are lifelong, multi-generational people living in Winnipeg. This is startling to them. They've had a massive influx of immigration, which affects metro housing in Winnipeg. There's no question about it. It's changed the dynamic entirely of what jobs are available historically to youth. Now immigration is taking those spots. And the healthcare system there, which it's, by the way, the largest employer by far, the largest industry by far.
Yeah.
Healthcare is investing all kinds of money, but the wait times are still way too long for the amount of people that live in that city. So Winnipeggers right now, is that what you call these people, by the way? Christoph, I don't want to offend anybody. Winnipegger? Winnipegites? Whatever. We'll know before the end of the show. Shout it out to me, okay? Winterpeggians? Winnipeggians. I don't know what you are. But I know this. I do think that I can commiserate because, yes, food prices are going up. That's really felt in a middle-class economy. Things like food, things like taxes, the housing costs going up. Any slight difference to the middle class, and it's devastating.
Well, and think about it. So because of the urban-rural kind of connection, you have a lot of people who their incomes are dependent not so much on annual raises. They're dependent on yields.
Right.
So, the better my crop does, the more money I have. The worse it does, the worse I have. If my trade deal goes away. So the economy kind of rises and falls based on the commodity pricing of whether it be wheat or whether it be, swine, pigs, and pork. That's how the world works in their environment. So you're seeing, quite frankly, that fluctuations up and down and down aren't matching the inflation levels that they're seeing on the other side, which the rest of Canada, we see it in a different way when you come east because, quite frankly, more manufacturing based. You're seeing a creep, but you're seeing, our inflation, food prices, all those things increasing at more than our raises to our, not so much public sector, but our private sector. Our public sectors are still getting
thriving.
Large raises because, we're codependent on them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We don't check. We don't check till it's after the fact.
Yeah, and we can't say no at this point. So every time someone who's an essential service says they want more money, we say how much.
No. Right.
Right. And that's kind of the spin we've gotten into.
Here's the problem. 80% of families are working harder than 10 years ago, as I mentioned, to just stay in the game. And many middle-income families aren't seeing real wage growth.
Yeah.
The meaning that increased expense cuts deeply into their budgets, which also means they're not saving. And if you're not saving, you're not expanding life. You're not making a big purchase down the road. You're not getting your kids into a home if they need the assistance. All of that is disappearing. So it's not that the middle class is disappearing. It's just being hollowed out.
Right.
One spoonful at a time.
Well, and it's interesting because I took a look at the top revenues. When you look at inflation and effects on economies, I first of all go to the top revenue producing companies in the sector, in the area. So commercial banking is number one, which you can see raises in commercial banking are not, they're private. The banks are doing fairly well, but quite frankly, their raises are modest. gas and petroleum wholesaling. So, that's a net export, net import business in that basis. It goes away and it comes back.
And price changes.
Price per barrel has been dreadful.
Yeah.
So quite frankly, on a commodity basis, they haven't seen, it's been, as we've seen, it's been around 60. It's growing up a little bit now. It's starting to go up, but not much. Hospitals, you mentioned, right? So there's horror stories on the West Coast on hospitals.
Meanwhile, they're sinking so much money into them right now. The Premier is focused on that in a huge way.
Well, it's crazy. Before, I think we were talking about it, it's for 1.5 million people, they're at like a crazy $100 million or something. And
yeah, I think Wapkanu is like really maybe over skis on the health. And reacting, Winnipeg had a lot of news about how long you'd wait for health care. The strain on health care, he's discovering quickly, you can't just throw money at it. It begins in other places.
Yeah, shout out to him. But if he's listening, or if someone's listening that wants to tell him about, he should go look at what Quebec's doing right now, even though they didn't get all the way there. But, they did acknowledge the problem. So, and kind of read what's going on in Ontario and our Auditor General reports. I think if you combine our Auditor General reports for what's going on in the healthcare with what Quebec is saying, I think you get a true story of what's happening in healthcare, even though as Canadians, we all want to put our head in the sand and forget about it and pretend it doesn't exist.
We want to do the virtuous thing, which is help each other and make sure each other's healthy, right?
Yeah.
Having said that, money has to be put into the right places, and historically, it's really top heavy. I think in the healthcare system, both at the pharmaceutical and the doctor end of it, the specialist end of it. Which, by the way, if you can get a specialist in any period of time that you need one, you're lucky.
The interesting, Mike, when you go down, and I'll just get to the top 10 here, but new car dealers, supermarkets and grocery stores, farm supplies, and then automobile wholesaling. So it drops. It's interesting to watch kind of how their top revenue companies kind of drop off fast.
Yeah.
And there aren't really a lot of, how do I say it?
There's no backup in those industries, really.
There's no backup. So, again, we talk about the U.S. Anything to do with cars, you got to be worried right now.
Well, there's a deal in place as parts go back and forth.
Yes.
Taxes are removed.
Right. And
if tariffs come into place, those industries are instantly impacted.
Yes.
And devastated, probably.
Yeah. And the top 10 employers in Manitoba right now is the government is number one.
Okay.
Right. Number 2 is Prairie Mountain Health. Number 3 is Maple Leaf Foods, which is, I guess, is the pork, right? Yep. That makes sense. BCE Inc., Manitoba Hydro, and Walmart. And then insurance company. And then number 8 is Boeing. The schools are number 9, and number 10, Bueller Industries.
So at the bottom of the list, really at the top of the list are those middle class jobs.
Yes.
The kind that pay enough to have a vacation, make sure that your kids can go to university, your house has a roof when it needs it, and life moves on fairly smoothly.
But you're kind of gripping, you're at this point, you're kind of holding on because that U.S. relationship is in the balance right now. You have CUSMA coming up. That's been kind of something that everyone's been talking about over the last year and a half. So,
well, we stopped talking about it. Now all we talk about is tariffs, apparently.
Yeah, exactly. So, that's what's challenging us right now.
One of the things that caught my attention was the just the housing situation and what it's like to buy a home. Mm-hmm. A typical home costs about $341,000 in Winnipeg, which means saving for a standard downsized home requires 13.6 months of income for a 20% down payment, up from 12.4 in just 2014. So that's a significant jump in revenue. The money you have to put aside, now you have to jump through flaming hoops at the bank to make sure that you're good for the money because they let it go crazy for so long.
Right.
The monthly mortgage payment now will eat 35% of after-tax income, up from 26% just a decade ago. So, 10% over a decade is over a decade is not a long period of time for a family in Winnipeg to see a massive difference in what they have to do to survive.
Yeah.
And now if they are the prototypical city and we're seeing that indication there. First of all, it sounds to me like if the U.S. doesn't play nice, Manitoba gets hit hard. Farmers get no margin because the margins are similar to the tariffs. The taxes going back and forth on aerospace will be devastating, and they'll take a pass on Winnipeg. Investment in industry will disappear quickly. People will be out of work shortly in that scenario. So we need to figure something out with the U.S. for Winnipeg. But it also kind of indicates that the rest of Canada, when Mark Carney talks about, everybody's going to have to breathe in, tighten the belt a little bit, and be prepared to suffer. I think what he's talking about is what we're seeing in Manitoba, Winnipeg specifically.
Yeah, well, it's your test model, and again, I come back to look at the imports that we bring in Manitoba. So, as we talked about, number one is turbojets. So propellers, turbojets, all the things that go into. Number two, or close by, is harvesting equipment. So all the equipment we bring in, farming, tractors, number three, pesticides, number four. So those are all the things we're bringing in.
To make stuff to send to the U.S.
Yes.
Am I wrong? All of those items we require to do business back into the U.S.
Pretty much, right? So all our heavy equipment, all our motor vehicles for passenger transport, all those parts that come in. So again, this is a symbiotic relationship where parts are moving back and forth across border. All our heavy machinery is coming. So these are all things we're bringing in that are making up, and even the insulated wiring, electrical, optical fiber cables that are all going into all the equipment that we're building. Centrifuges, filtering of purified machinery, all that stuff is stuff we're bringing into for oil and gas, for farming, for all those things we're using. We're bringing in from the U.S.
We're not self-sufficient even. So if it becomes difficult to do business with the U.S., but we have business someplace else in the world, but we're still kind of out of the game because the items that we need to do the business with are suddenly taxed at a price that makes us no longer valid in the other markets we found. We're priced out.
Well, we are, and we'd have to go, I guess we'd have to try to, and here's the challenging part, which is where we're seeing in Winnipeg first, which is something we've talked about on other shows. Our exporting is highly dependent on the U.S., as we just talked about. Our importing, highly dependent on the U.S. So that goes away. So we can say we're not going to import any of these things anymore, quite frankly, because they're not taking our stuff. They're producing it at home. They're not taking it anymore. So therefore, where do we go find this? Who has a plan to manufacture it at home?
Well, first of all, Trump has told us, I don't want you doing business with China.
Right.
So the Asian market essentially disappears. Maybe we do, but Japan is self-sufficient in manufacturing and certainly technology and even farming.
Yep.
We're probably not going to do a lot of business with them. It's a great question, Paul. I don't know where this lands because there's really no market. Plus, Trump isn't going to let us sell aerospace technology to people around the world.
That business is going away, right?
Yeah.
That business is going away. So if we still want to be in the agricultural business in Manitoba, and we're importing all our parts and products and heavy machinery from primarily the United States, then we have to go and figure out, if we don't have any exports to the United States, which makes up 71% of this market, then we're not going to be able to import, right? Because we can't not be able to sell it somewhere and have the money to buy it from somewhere else, right? So we have to be making it at home,
right?
But then we're going to have to figure out where we
source all of the material to do it with.
So I guess that's the question, at the end of the day, how much of our wheat gets diverted into other countries?
And are we in the market in those countries at the price that we can offer it by the time we get it there? Are we able to get it there in, a fashion, I guess if it's already processed, yes, but if it's raw, no, we probably can't be in the market as easily in some parts of the world, like, Australia, for example, or even as far away as Asia. I don't know that our wheat products hold up. I guess if it is processed, somebody else could tell me on that. But I think you've got a great point. Where do we go to source and to sell in enough time, in time to keep that middle class surviving, not
Right.
just in Winnipeg, but across the country.
Where did it, so, and not too much doom and gloom, where did the depression, when you see all the pictures of the depression, where do you see it from?
It's always in the cities. It's always, yeah.
The prairies.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Oh, in the prairies.
Of course, you see all the pictures
the farm guys. Yeah.
the farm guys dry up fast, right? Because quite frankly, as the market and the nationalism and the borders close, the thing that gets hit first is farms, right? Because they need to, farmers just, and you think about it now, this season's done in the farm business.
Yep.
They've started, they've bought fertilizer. They've already figured out what they're doing for the upcoming summer season. Like they've already made that jump. You had to commit to get into
the pricing at that time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So you had to be in, planning, be there, so your planning is for next year now. So you're kind of, I'm going to get through this season.
Yeah.
Come the fall, I'm going to make my decision up for next season. So, you're always, a year to 6 months, 6 months to a year ahead of the market.
Sense.
Yeah, you have to be in that market, like any business. So now they're sitting there watching this. They're going to watch CUSMA, and then they're going to figure out what to do next. If they don't have a decision, they're just going to stop. And then at that point, the imports from anywhere else in the world are going to slow down. The exports, they're not going to be shipping anything other than the stuff they've made this year. To get rid of it,
They're going to be at a standstill.
They'll stand still. They'll stall. And then again, that's why markets, when you see things sort of bogged down in smaller cities and rural communities, you see that quite frankly because of the timeline of planning.
They can't.
It's not real time.
They have to be ahead of the game on pricing. It's a forecast, actually, at all times. You could lose a crop.
Exactly.
You could have a disease, a bad situation.
Yep.
So already farmers are taking a pretty big risk.
Oh, a huge risk.
And now add to this, they only make 8 to 15% on average profit margin.
Right.
So now if they're tariffed 10%, they have to find another market. If the U.S. dries up that quickly on that, they just can't afford to be there.
But here's the, and this is the question I'm starting to ask more and more in these conversations. Where's the other market?
I don't know. And this is a frightening discussion. Is it Europe? I don't know.
But you look at the numbers, and we've talked about in other shows. Like when you go, for example, Mexico, I'm pretty sure I'm pretty close to the number, but we export about $6 billion. Canada. The UK, 30-something billion dollars. Like the amount we export
compare that to the US,
$479 billion dollars. So, we're talking, an asterisk, a period.
Yeah.
We're not talking, something that we can just pass by.
No, this is like a full stop. We need to.
But you have one point. So, and that's where I'm getting concerned because the date for CUSMA is coming up. It's time to go in region by region and actually lay down a contingency plan to start to talk to people by region what they're going to do.
I'm wondering if Carney comes back from his most recent trip. It's funny. He's taking a premier with him on this one.
Yeah, 9 cities.
I mean,
well, the premier with him because the premier is smart enough to realize where does he sell his wheat? Where does he,
he probably said, "I'm coming with you. I don't know what you're up to."
He doesn't have a pharma market anymore, so he's got to figure out how to push, that industry out. He's got to figure out what to do with canola.
Also, Saskatchewan, not to switch provinces, they're also pretty healthy historically. That could be another test market in Canada. But we see the premier getting on a plane and going with the prime minister and saying, I need to know what you're up to here. I've got to be doing business for my province.
Well, and honestly, I think it's his constituents behind him. I think the difference a little bit between the two provinces, in Saskatchewan, I think there's a big collective of business people behind him saying, you get on the plane.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's him so much. I think it's quite frankly, and then when he gets off the plane, I think there's a big constituents of people waiting for him.
Come here.
What deal did you sign?
Yeah.
I don't think there's. I think it's a little different there, right? I think we're talking about two, and you know,
interesting,
not
right?
to knock, not to knock Manitoba, because I think they've had their challenges, but you know, they did have the premier before Canoe.
Well, there was Stevenson, and then before that,
The missing premier, the one that went to Costa Rica or somewhere for 3/4 of the year.
yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Christoph, fact check
Christoph?
on that one. So
Pallister? I know that I'm close.
Patterson?
Pallister. Hey, listen,
Yeah.
nobody said that there was going to be a premier's quiz at the start of the show. But that was an era.
Well, things were just getting done, right? So
Right.
we were in a kind of one of those eras where we had a, you know, Biden was in great relationship with the U.S. weren't worrying too much. You know, we could spend 3/4 of the year in the sun and, you know, be, you know, calling everyone from FaceTime and doing all that cool stuff. And now you have to be in the game. You can complain all you want. You can hope that you know, the U.S. changes their mind, but you know, we saw last night. If State of the Union, you watched him. He's not. You know, he told you. He said, "I don't care what Congress is going to vote. I don't care what the Supreme Court's going to do. I have embargo power, and quite frankly, if you decide you don't want to take my deal, I won't take any of your goods.
I'll embargo you.
Yeah, you're done." So I don't really care. Vote what you want, you guys. Yeah, I don't really. I have the power to do it. That's the power I have. I'll use it, and I'll get it from somewhere else. And that's what he's willing to do. So,
And if that's the case, then there's not much choice, but we're going to take the deal.
yeah,
Maybe negotiate a little bit on the 10% in certain industries. But overall, taxation back and forth kills aerospace, kills agriculture, kills pharma.
well, and also, you know, we're at the point now. So this is, you know, the Ukraine-Russian war is still ongoing.
Yeah.
But at some point that'll stop, and the U.S. will move in, right,
Take the wheat.
to assume the materials
Yeah.
and lands that they were promised under the agreement that he, you know, that he did make Zelensky sign, that we didn't. So, you know, we gave the money without any hooks or conditions. So, and they will move in, and they will, really working against our own interest, will start to export, and or you know, or U.S. will import as much as they can from a country that they're supporting or they have supported.
Imagine
If our
that.
relationship is tilted, so that market will change too. So then we'd have to shift. But these are all the plans. Like, I know we don't want to talk about it. I get we don't want to talk, and this is the frustrating thing to me. I know we don't want to talk about it, but it's not hard to find. Like, you know, preparing for this show, and you know, just for the people watching, you know, preparing for this show is, you know, we pull the annual report of the province. We sit down and look at the, you know, import export associations. We pull the numbers. It's pretty easy to see. There's graphs. You see where all these things are provided, you know, and you look at it and you say, okay, what are my risk industries? But at this point, let's start to actually talk, you know, intelligently about what the contingency plans are if that goes sideways.
Well, you want to, I mean, if you take a look, Winnipeg's a good example.
Yeah.
If you take healthcare out of the mix, which we can't really afford to be, you take healthcare out of the mix, aerospace out of the mix,
Yeah.
and even just a little bit of the farming, and there is provincial collapse, I think. You know, they can't, and then what does that mean federally? Well, that means that we're going to be subsidizing the farmers, the aerospace. We're just getting deeper into debt.
Well, these people will pick up and move. They have to. At this point, they will, but because the
Aerospace will, for sure.
Yeah, once those industries are leaving, as they start to, you know, move to other places, and they leave Winnipeg, quite frankly, banks will close, hospitals will get smaller,
commercial real estate,
supermarkets will wind down, all those things will happen, you know, and you're starting to see, it's interesting what you're starting to see in market trends, even here in the East, Central and Canada. You know, you're seeing the composition of businesses changing. You know, the Loblaws is going to open more no-frills.
I saw that.
So they're changing to discount supermarkets. So they're not, you know, they're going to expand shoppers, but reduce the Loblaws branded stores. So, you're going to see all these things happen as the market changes. And then, quite frankly, co-ops, farmer co-ops, equipment, all those things, they'll reduce.
Well, Winnipeg is already starting to feel it. It started with housing, the cost of living, food, and less hours to be paid for on an overtime basis. Government jobs started to be cut. The healthcare industry grew, but they imported people to do it with. And so really, as our test market, as the prototype in Canada, it's a little frightening right now. The teeter-totter that Winnipeg is sitting on, we all are. And probably maybe it goes down faster than anybody else, but it is indicative of what we're going to see in every other province across the country, I believe, in some fashion.
That's why, so politically, and then just, before we wrap up, if I was on the political end and I was actually in power as a government right now, I would be moving to places like Manitoba to get a plan in place. Because the last thing you want to do, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you see Winnipeg and the province of Manitoba start to struggle significantly, the rest of Canada will see it's coming in certain fashions and form. And then that'll be the domino that starts going. And I think that's why you got to get a plan in place.
Maybe what we need to do is, that's a great idea, actually, in my mind. Okay, so let's talk that through for a second.
Sure.
Let's use Winnipeg as the test market.
Yep.
Let's say, okay, U.S., we're going to do everything based on our successes in Winnipeg and Manitoba at large. And if everything works out there, then we'll roll it out across Canada. But until we come to this negotiation point in one of our bellwether provinces, we don't know if it's going to work for us. Let's do a test.
Yeah. And the first thing I would do, big infrastructure project.
Sounds right.
We're talking about huge infrastructure projects in other places in Canada right now. This is a province that needs a big win. So, I know we're talking about AI centers and energy and all that good stuff. Use the resources of Manitoba and find a way to actually do something on a big scale here that helps Canada from an infrastructure perspective. I think it makes sense. You have
rather than losing people to other cities from Winnipeg that are qualified, keep them.
You have machinists. You have people who are heavily skilled from different countries to build turbines, to build motors, to build. Isn't this the place to go?
Sounds right.
Yeah, it does sound right, doesn't it?
All right. Well, I think we solved another problem, maybe just for Winnipeg today. Thanks for talking to me about this, because I think it's important, Paul, that as Canadians, we understand there's indicators out there already right now that we need to look at. And I do like the idea of making that test market where we begin to solve some problems.
Yeah. And look forward to talking about it more as we proceed, because really the outcome here, it will show.
Remains to be seen.
Yeah, remains to be seen.
We have one tariff announcement, one CUSMA meeting left, and we'll be back at this table, I think.
Thanks,
Thanks, Paul.
Thanks.